our presenter, Elizabeth, whenever you can. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming to the GIC on such a beautiful day. I would prefer to be on a mountain as well. So today I'm going to discuss something I studied as an undergraduate. Now, I chose hormones in the soil with a question mark for a purpose. It is a question. There are scientific papers that I will show you where scientists are still questioning the connection between these hormone mimics and possible endocrine disrupting compounds in our bodies. It is not 100% proven. It is only an observation based on research that I did as an undergraduate. So one more time, if you don't mind, we're going very slow. There is a lot of jargon and we're not going to go through it very quickly. If you have a question, please write it down. I'm very excited to answer it if I can, but this is phrased as a question for a reason. So let's explore together. Okay, so one more time just to introduce myself and how this story came to be. I work, volunteer actually at the GFN radio station. I co-host Green Mondays, which means I get to do research every week on an environmental topic. Now, this is very fun for me, but it is also very difficult sometimes for most people to get through the science. Now, I understand that it is a challenge, but it is very important to our lives and to our bodies. I will apologize beforehand because it is not an art show. It is not about the pictures. It's about the science and questioning where we are and how we live. This is pretty much my only picture, but as you can see, in South Korea, they use plastic. They use here, oops, sorry. Can you please bring it up? They use plastic as a part of their farming practices. Now they do this for a number of reasons. Whether or not the good outweighs the bad is part of the question. We have plastics everywhere in our lives, and how they affect our bodies comes into question based on how the plastics are processed. These are my favorite fruits in Korea. But how they come to us and how they come to us in America is very similar. So the research I will start with is from California, one of the major berry growing areas of the United States. Can you please click on the link? Okay, this is a publication from the EPA, so that's the Environmental Protection Agency in America. What they're looking at are the effects of plastics and how agriculture is formed in America. Please go ahead and scroll down. I had it set for okay, please go ahead and keep scrolling. I apologize, I had this prepared. Okay. Okay, this is talking about plastiture. Now that is the phrase that comes to mind when people put plastics down over the soil. Why the waste would be studied is because they use water and they pour it on top to water the crops. And how this works together produces, in some cases, almost 100% in the case of strawberries here, of all of the strawberries in Southern California. Now, just using strawberries as an example, you get the sense that they are delicious, maybe sometimes expensive here, but they require a lot of water and a lot of care. Did you see how close the strawberries were to the plastics? Just in the picture. Now, how those plastics affect the soil and thereby affect the plants and the strawberries within the soil is my concern. I studied reclaimed wastewater, which means it's the water when you flush your toilet that gets processed. Now, they have done studies such as you mentioned with dioxin and some specific kinds of chemicals or hormone mimics that show the correlation between animals being affected by the water and human development. They have shown problems with sexual differentiation in frogs. That's what my lab in America as an undergraduate studied specifically. Now, our connection with Korea is quite interesting because there is a postdoc this month who's going back to the lab. He's here, he's Korean, and he's going to study it one more time together with our American scientists, but they're studying the specific animal effects. I studied the plants. For me, I was very excited to see if the plants were being affected by the same wastewater. And when I came to live in South Korea, in Paju, I couldn't believe there was plastics. The same compound that I had learned is affecting the animals, and I studied as affecting the plants, was now in the soil. So one more time, I was quite concerned because I don't know how it affects humans. Once we consume things like strawberries, even from an animal standpoint, those animals, even if we eat those animals, they will take in the same kind of pollution that mimics a hormone in your body. And if, even in America, almost 100% of my favorite strawberries are being grown with plastics, how does that make me feel confident about my food? Can you please go click on the slide? Look at those beautiful strawberries. Okay, so again, just to put some numbers at your feet, almost 7,500 acres of only strawberries are grown in California. And that is where the majority of this research has come from, actually looking at the plastics in the soil. Here in Korea, my question is, how many farms actually use the plastics? I know by studying the difference in food production in South Korea and North Korea, one of the major reasons the soil is conserved here is because we use plastics. We use it to keep soil from eroding into the water. We use it every day. I've also had a chance to volunteer at a wonderful place in my neighborhood called the Dory Community Cafe. There you can talk to local farmers. It's amazing. You can speak to them and ask them, how do you grow your food? I highly recommend being able to go and talk to the people that are feeding you. Farms here in Korea that have discontinued or stopped using plastics, including pesticides. So let's say you want organic strawberries and you will pay maybe 3 times as much. Even if those pesticides were there 30 years ago, you can still find pesticides, also known as hormone mimics. The same thing that's in those plastics are in the pesticides in a different form. They come into your body, they affect changes, and it doesn't just affect you, it affects your children because it gets passed through your fat, through the mother's breast milk, and on to the next generation. And this happens for 9 generations. This is not a small thing. This is something to consider because we use plastics everywhere, including growing in our food. Can you please go ahead and click on that link? again, we're to PubMed. This is where scientists come and publish their articles. When you enter the scientific community, you need publications in order to fund your research. So here in South Korea, this is a study that shows that even 30 years after stopping pesticide use, you can still find pesticides. You can still find these compounds. This is done in Jeonju University. Please go ahead and click on the next link. Please go ahead. Here's another scientific paper about soil and how it's used. So whether or not these soils are being tested for plastics in Korea, they have not yet studied. They've studied it in California, but not specifically for these compounds. So they have not yet studied it here in Korea. My hope is by looking at what they have studied, someone will take the next step. Someone will go ahead and take a look at how much we're actually taking in of these plastic compounds. Okay, can you please click on the PowerPoint link? Okay, here we go. Sorry, I said I had one picture. This is actually a map. So this is a soil map, one of the older soil maps I could find of the soils in South Korea. Now, as you probably noticed, it includes what we consider as North Korea, because this whole peninsula has been graded on how good their soil is. It's amazing that people have lived here for thousands of years because they've been able to feed themselves for thousands of years. Now, if a major difference in being able to feed yourself between that top area of the peninsula and that bottom area of the peninsula is how many plastics they use to conserve the soil, it makes me, on one hand, very happy for this technology because we can feed ourselves, but also a little concerned about what we're feeding ourselves. So this is, can you go ahead and click back? This is my major question and why I wanted to present today. I wanted to make sure that other people had an idea of what the substance of hormone mimics or endocrine disrupting compounds were, where they came from, and how they may be connected with the soils and the food that we eat. Please go ahead. Thank you very much. Just hold on a second. Okay, now why again I'm talking to you about this used the reclaimed wastewater that I did study to grow plants. And this is using this wastewater to pour onto the soil. And it's becoming more and more common as our water resources are becoming more intertwined with the reclaimed or used again water. So what we have is we have a compound of one pollutant. If we could put our finger on it, we'll say it's dioxide. That's just one example. Now, dioxide is interesting because if you burn plastics, it goes into the air. We can breathe it in, it can come into our body. But when you find it in reclaimed wastewater, it's gotten compounded. So that means it's been made into a very, very small, very, very tiny amount, something that is not measurable as toxic. But it comes through and it gets into your soil. One more time. As I studied the reclaimed wastewater, I was very surprised to learn it was being used for crops, for plants that feed people. And again, whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, we'll find out. But it is a question I think that needs to be asked. And if you have any questions, I would love to talk about it. The science is working its way on answering these questions, but it's not there yet. And I'm very, very interested to find out some of these answers. So thank you so much for your time. I know this talk is kind of short, but I do appreciate the fact that you've decided to come here today.
very informative. So now it is time for the Q&A portion of the talk. So if you did not receive a piece of paper, just you can raise your hand and one of the volunteers can pass you one. So you can write your question down and pass it back, and they'll pass it up to me and I will ask Elizabeth the questions. And so if you could please refrain from raising your hand, and if you have any questions that don't get asked during the talk, feel free to talk to Elizabeth when we're all finished. Okay, so I want to start. Okay, so the first question I'm going to ask, so you talked a lot about strawberries were used a lot with the plastics on the soil. So you said like, a really big amount, 94% of strawberries are grown with that. But, so can you talk about what specific maybe crops or vegetables in Korea do they use the plastic? Do you know?
That picture was from Korea.
Oh, okay.
So it's in Korea. Yes.
Okay, so you said, yeah, so California and Korea are just the same in that way?
Yes.
Yeah, and do they use it a lot for just a lot of fruits, or do they do other crops too in Korea, do you know?
I've seen it with corn as well.
Okay, so really common things that people are just, eating all the time. And so I had another one, so you mentioned they're using the plastics to reduce the erosion, right? And which is obviously a big thing. There's not that much soil, it's really valuable, and like we saw the soil chart, doesn't seem like there are a lot of really great places in Korea maybe to grow, which makes it tough for South Korea. But so would you say is it worth the trade-off to use the plastics to help reduce the erosion? Like, is it worth the potential risk of these compounds? Like, are people finding that out?
The question is, can you reverse it? I don't think it would be possible to get them to stop using plastics overnight. I don't think that's a possibility. Unless other methods like permaculture, which means that they don't use a plastic, but they use some more traditional forms like hay, or maybe a different, not just growing one kind of crop together, but growing many different kinds. It's more traditional agriculture. Then I think that would be an option, but the elimination of plastics overnight is not going to happen, in my opinion.
Yeah, and so I was going to say, okay, so so you mentioned other ways that maybe we can reduce erosion, like different methods, but it's not going to be potentially so soon. But is it hard for people to try to get into that? Like, I guess plastics are a lot easier to use, so like, are people less inclined to try these new methods because it's just plastics around and it's cheap? So
in terms of like how common it is to use plastics in Korea?
Yeah, as opposed to the other methods.
It depends on the region, I think, but that is also an excellent question in terms of, I would like to know that answer myself, so I do not know that one.
Yeah, so it's another one of those ones where people just, we'll see, and like, okay.